So, good morning, Tim. I'm so glad to welcome you to Finding Hidden Courage and for being here. And I love you. You're a dear, dear friend.
Thank you. That's how you.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to interview you is because I think you have an amazing story. A story that I think can help others. Because you literally went through a very dark night of the soul. Such a rude awakening that one day you basically couldn't get out of bed and walk very well and thought it was something else. But I'm going to let you tell your story, your near-death experience, and how it changed your life, how it affected your life, how today, what kind of a person are you as a result of that may help others not only get through whatever they're going through, but more importantly, how it affected you in a way that has permanently made a dent in your life.
Sure.
So Tim, on that morning, could you go back and tell us kind of what happened and recreate it for us?
Sure. So this was going back to August of 15, and several weeks prior to the date that my journey started, I had been out in the park with my daughter, and I was kicking one of those big red utility balls, right? And the next day I was having a little trouble walking, and it was a little uncomfortable. And it got progressively more uncomfortable, and I saw my doctor, and the thought was that perhaps I'd hyperextended my knee or done something like that. So it was rest and elevation and ice and the usual treatment. And it's sort of better, but I started to get numb in my leg. And fast forward to then in the process of supposedly getting this treatment for what was presumed to be something I'd done to my knee, my other leg started to get numb. And that's when I knew that it was pretty obvious that there was something more going on here. And September 4th of 15 is when my doctor sent me to the hospital to get a scan. But by the end of that day, the doctor walked in and said, "Hate to give you this news, but you've got a number of lesions throughout your body: liver, lung, and spine, and kidney." He couldn't say cancer yet because they didn't know whether they were cancerous or benign or exactly what they were. But I mean, I certainly knew that probably wasn't a good thing. I mean, I probably didn't need whatever it was. They were unwelcome. So yes. my first yes. indication was, okay, well, we'll just kind of play this through and figure out what it is. It happened pretty quickly after that. I was transferred from the initial hospital that made the diagnosis, and at that time I was pretty much confined to a bed.
Could you walk at that time?
They weren't comfortable enough to have me walking, so I was what they called a fall risk. So okay. That really began the wheelchair process, and then over the next several weeks, as I was going through one hospital to another for various, to be diagnosed and biopsy, and then to figure out what the treatment plan was going to be. I was pretty much confined to a gurney, and at that point, I had pretty much lost any feeling or use of my body below my waist.
Oh gosh!
And ultimately, it was that I had metastatic melanoma that had attacked my liver, lung, and spine. And the reason that I was having trouble walking is that I had a number of tumors in my spine that were squeezing off the nerve bundle, in the spinal column and
wow.
affecting my lower extremities. So that's kind of how that started. That was a rough day. That was sort of the hope was dashed that these weren't benign lesions, or this wasn't. I mean, it could have been
a virus.
It could have been a virus or MS or who knows what that could have been. That's really when, although I didn't realize it at the time, I wasn't to come home for another 7 months.
7 months?
7 months. I went from one hospital to another. And then eventually, finally got to, where we started treatment and then figured out what the treatment plan, was going to be. But, that was really the September 4th of 15. That was really the beginning of stepping away from my family, my home, my job, my community. Anything that was a normal, typical routine for me came to an end.
You were running a company, and prior to that, I know you have your MBA, I know that you're an attorney. I mean, you had a very high-powered life and career.
Yeah.
Now, when they told you about the lesions being cancer, did they give you was it stage 1, 2, 3, the way that they stage cancer?
When we finally determined that they were cancerous and that it, in fact was a spread of melanoma that I had been treated for about 5 years prior.
Got it.
So when I for my 50th birthday, I got my first diagnosis of melanoma, and it was removed, and I went on with my life. But apparently, it had continued to spread. So the principle of immunotherapy is it addresses your adaptive immune system, much like the way when you get a polio vaccine, your body then internalizes what it's been received, and it builds an antibody and it fights it. This the combination of drugs that I received made it such that my body was able to recognize the cancer that it had missed before, okay, that it didn't recognize as something being foreign, and then also to boost up my own immune system, to use your own body's resources, to fight the cancer. And I remember telling him, I said, I realize we all have we all know we're adults. We know the life cycle, right? I mean, death.
The shelf life.
Right. Death is part of, it's part of the cycle, right?
Right.
I just wasn't prepared at 56 to check out. And I said, I'm not really ready to go anywhere. And he looked at me and he said, well, then don't.
Great.
Right? And that was like the first time, that I was looking for something other than somebody handing me a shovel. Right?
Yeah.
One, I didn't know how I was going to react, right? And I don't know that anybody does. I certainly didn't know how I was going to react because I'd never been in a situation like that before, right? I knew how I hoped I might react. I knew how I wanted to react, right? But I didn't know how I was going to react. And I had a day or so of a pity party.
Yeah.
Until I realized that wasn't going to do me any good. But I got past the pity party because I realized that really wasn't going to do me any good. And I happen to believe that, that thoughts are things and that you can definitely, impact your experience by the thoughts that you have. And if people haven't looked into the power of the subconscious over the body and the mind and healing and all the rest of it, I would encourage people to do that.
Well, and I want to interject here because I know about your background, coming from your mom, that she was a student of New Thought, which then she exposed you to.
I took an inventory of where I was and the doctor I was with and the treatments that were available and the options that were available to me that had not and would not have been available to me just, 6 months prior.
Wow.
And I said, this is about as good as it gets, right? So I'm going to fight that fight for myself and my family. And it occurred to me that I could either focus on getting better or I could focus on getting bitter. And
better or bitter.
Yeah. And right. It sounds kind of trite and cliche, but on the other hand, it was like, okay, to take just an account of the small acts of kindness that were shown to me, in some of the simplest ways. And, you realize what an impact. But, you meet people that are in a position to do the things that had the biggest impact. And it could just be a thought, it could be a glance, it could be a sharing of food, it could be something very, very simple. And I remembered thinking how many times prior to me experiencing this, I had not shown up for somebody, right? I had not gone to somebody in the hospital because it made me uncomfortable or because you didn't fit in my day or,
right.
And I kind of went, wow,
It was
I sort of
call for yourself.
Yeah, it was like, I felt like, I felt like Dickens and Scrooge, going, wow, the Christmas passed, and what were you thinking? Well, it's just something I should have told somebody back then that I didn't, missed opportunities.
So when we were talking about your tools again, and when you couldn't do it for yourself, when those days, and they had to hit you when you said, what, I don't know if I can do this. What came to your mind then? Where did you get that inner courage?
Well, that's when I turned to others for some help, right? When I couldn't carry it on my own, right? Then I would turn to my wife. I'd turn to you. I'd turn to friends, and I'd open up about where I was at, and then I'd get the pep talk that I needed, and I'd get back in the game.
What about the kids when they came to visit you? How were they? Because they were young.
Initially, they didn't fully understand it, right? And then obviously as the days became weeks and the weeks months, they figured out something was going on. And I remember Laird telling me that, at one point in the middle of the tour, where I was gone, the phone would ring and it'd be the nurse or somebody scheduling something, and the kids would ask, "Did Daddy die?" That I would not have done as well as I did, emotionally, mentally, notwithstanding the tools at my disposal, had Laird my wife not taken 95% of that load away from me to allow me to just get better, right?
What an amazing, I mean, she's an amazing person, as you are too. I mean, both of you are just outstanding. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to tell your story, Tim, because it's such a story of not only finding that hidden courage, but really walking your talk.
And to think that, I drove over here today, right, with hand controls on my car, but I drove over here. And I was able to get my walker out and walk in,
yes.
and I mean, the amount of progress. And
I have to say, for not only for our audience, that I was shown your MRI on a cell phone of all of the lesions, and basically all the spots that you had cancer throughout your whole body. And it was definitely a death sentence. I mean, it was terrifying. And to think that you have, along with the help of many others, along with medical miracles, survived.
oh, it's amazing. I mean, it's really humbling, right?
Well, and not only survived but thrived,
right,
because of your attitude.
And it seems to me that the best way that I can honor the people that came before me, that were part of the clinical trials, that for whom treatment did not come soon enough, right? For the doctors that I encountered, and the researchers and all the other people, behind the scenes. That, I mean, I owe it to them to go live the life that I can live and do something. And, it's making good on those, to be a better person, to be a better husband, spouse, neighbor, friend, father, right? And I'm not perfect at any of those things yet, right? But I'm certainly more aware,
yes,
right, of what's truly important in my life. One of the things that I would encourage people in any sort of adversity is that people can have a tendency, and I've seen it with people that worked with me and that I've worked with, where they sit and they look at where they're starting from and they go, this is impossible, because they're looking at they're stepping back and looking at the whole picture. And I segmented that journey into literally, 3 steps a day, right? Today I got up and I did this, and I tried this and I did this. And
small steps.
Right? And I focused on those because I had to rack up some, hey, I can do this, right? And I remember the day that I first moved a toe. I remember the day that
wow,
I struggled, but I mastered the transfer board to the wheelchair, or I mastered, I remember my first effort to stand on my own, right? With aid. Took 5 people. I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
But I remember when that happened, and I remember when I took my first step, literally the first step,
wow,
and then the first 10 steps, and then they said, okay, now you got to walk to the end of the hallway. Well, that might as well have been a football field to me,
yes,
right? But I did it. And then it was, now it was 25 yards, and then it was 50 yards, and then it was get into the car on your own. And so I broke up those things into individual, tasks, and that's how I got through it. Had I looked back and focused on everything that I'd lost, right? My ability to my career, my ability to travel, my ability to get on a plane, walk, drive, dress myself. If I just focused on what I'd lost, right? I mean, it would have been a whole different experience. I think I've done some of my most aware living since I've come home, right? Because I'm more aware of each day that I wake up, and I start with a simple gratitude of thank you, right?
Thank you for this new day.
Thank you. I'm here.
This new canvas.
Right. I'm here. And thank you for the fact that I am getting better, and I feel good, and I'm getting stronger, and I know that I have what I need to go face the challenges that we all face just in daily living, right? This year will be a year where I've set for myself the intention of reinventing myself and trying to figure out what that looks like,
yes,
right? And maybe it's redefining what work is. Whether it's consulting or working with a myriad of companies and doing as much as I can on the travel front.
Yes.
But still, utilizing from the waist up, where I'm not impaired,
right,
and making accommodations for the waist down. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worse or better, but it's going to be different. And so recognizing that it's going to be different, then what accommodations do I need to make? And as I said, when I was in the acute rehab facility and working alongside other people that, like myself, mine was as a result of disease, but others were a result of traumatic injury, right?
Yes.
In fact, they were in some cases, veterans, that had come back, and I looked at what the intentions they'd set for themselves, some including going back in uniform. I thought, you know what, I can do this too, right?
Right.
I mean, who am I to complain, right?
That's
what
right.
what right do I have to complain, right?
Well, and it reflects who you are as an individual. Thoughts are things. You're now regrouping your life. You're saying, okay, it's not over until the fat lady sings, and I've got a lot more inside of me. In fact, there is an expression, don't die with your music still in you.
Right.
And you have much to give. And I know through the experience that you just shared with us that this is going to help a lot of people that are listening and hopefully drawing strength from your courage.
And that's my
strength.
biggest hope. That really, truly is my biggest hope, because I'm not arrogant enough to say, okay, this is what you need to do, right?
Yes.
This is what worked for
But
me.
this was your
Right.
path.
This was what worked for me. And if somebody listening to this at some point says, you know what, I'm gonna try a couple of those things, and it works for them, that would make me feel
It's
good.
the whole purpose of why
Right.
we're doing this. And I want to personally thank you, Tim, for being here, for talking about your past, your courage, and the great person that you are.
Thank you.
And I love you.
I enjoy it. I love you
Thanks
too.
for
Thanks
being
for letting
here.
me share my story.
Thank you.